Hey everybody, it's Dan, Warpaint JKU. We're back in the garage and finally gonna get after the rear suspension on Maple Leaf. So come and check it out. All right, guys, before we get into it, just want to recap with you guys what we've done so far on this rig and where we're at now. It's been a few weeks. We had the holidays and we now have a winch plate, okay? I have all the steel to kind of finish up the front bumper, mount our winch in there and get it looking like something. We also have the front end down here pretty much set up with that Super Duty Dana 60, right? You saw me make the tie rod. I also made a drag link. Now, I know this drag link looks a little crazy because it's so elevated above our weld-on high steer arm, but it won't be a big deal because all of the pressure that would be put on this is actually going to be transferred down to our tie rod with a hydraulic ram. Having it above going over the leaf spring will allow when the axle moves to keep this and maintain this distance between here, and we should be good. But again, this entire build is custom, so we may have to make some adjustments. In order to basically figure out the ride height for this spring, we first needed to figure out the arch of the spring. Now, on the front of our vehicle, which is a little bit heavier because we have the engine up there, our front spring is completely flat, okay? From eye to eye, the spring is 57 inches long, and that's exactly what it is if I put a tape measure on it. So we are perfectly flat in the front, which will give the spring some nice characteristics when we're off-road, especially with the shackle angle that we have. But that doesn't really help us in the rear because the rear isn't as heavy. So our spring is going to have a little bit of an arch. So to figure out a ride height, right, we basically needed to figure out from eye to eye in the back, okay, a straight line, not following the curve of the spring, but just a perfectly straight line, and then measure from that straight line straight down to the axle tube. But with an arched spring, we're no longer at 57 inches, right? I said we were gonna shoot for 56. So after jacking up the front of the vehicle to where this measurement from eye to eye was 56 inches, I was able to run that same straight line and measure from there down to the axle tube. I then transferred that measurement to a piece of tubing that I used to help set up the rear. I took a piece of just rectangular tube scrap that I had laying around in the garage. And the reason we did that, and it doesn't have to be arched, is remember, because we went from eye to eye with a perfectly straight line. And that's exactly what this edge of the tubing represents. So I measured 56 inches, right? I have a dot up here for my front eye. I measured 56 inches back for the dot back here. Now the front mounting location up here on the frame is kind of a permanent fixed location because it's just gonna be something like this. There's no movement in this, okay? So I set it up at the right height where I roughly wanted it under the frame, went to the back, adjusted where the back sat, okay, under the frame, and then measured from my point down to the axle tube. And I adjusted everything until I was at the measurement I needed to be at to match the 56-inch measurement that we got in the front. Now, keep in mind, this may not be absolutely perfect when it comes to measuring your ride height, but we can play with the length of our shackle a tiny bit in the back to raise or lower it. And we can also use like an extra thin little leaf spacer between our perch and the leaf spring pack to help raise the spring. So if anything, we want to be a little bit on the lower side in the back, but I think we're going to be good. Now, you guys saw what I was going to do up in the front and how to mount that and get it in the right position. So we determined in the back where we needed to be with our shackle angle, okay, how long our shackle was going to be, and then how to mount it. And we determined that the best way to do that was to actually mount our shackle hanger through the frame. Now, this frame was never designed to have a tube going through it to hang a leaf spring from. So we're gonna have to basically plate the outside of the frame with some 3/16 on both sides to make it stronger. And then we're gonna weld the tube in there, put our bushing in, hang our shackle, and connect it to our leaf spring. All right, so we're back in the garage, new day. We're on the driver's side of the Jeep. Everything you saw me do on the passenger side, I then came over and did on the driver's side. But I continued on the driver's side. I actually welded that piece of tube in there. I didn't finish weld the plates on this side or the back side of the frame just yet. We're gonna get to that in a minute. But I did wind up off camera measuring for the shackles. Now, we put a 1/4 inch offset shackle on this side and a 1/2 inch or so offset shackle on this side, which allowed us to mount that spring and allowed the spring to move and not contact anything. The problem though is now when we move the spring back, right? We're not at a 45-degree angle yet. It's already the eye of the spring is contacting the frame. Now we knew that was going to happen, so we're going to have to basically dovetail and cut a section of this rear frame off. And that's pretty common. A lot of people do it for a lot of reasons. Now, one of those reasons is a frame chop bumper. A lot of people do that without completely custom suspension so that they just have a better departure angle. We're basically going to do a frame chop on this as well and remove this rear cross member. The thing is, when you do those frame chops and remove that rear cross member, the bumper actually provides the strength, and our bumper is not really gonna be all that super strong. So we're gonna take another piece of tube and build our own cross member just further in under the Jeep to support the rear frame with those leaf spring shackles, but still give us the movement on the shackle in the rear. Without further ado, guys, we're gonna get back to it. So after some simple cutting with a Sawzall, I was able to basically cut one side, separate it. You're able to get back over here to this side, do the same thing with the Sawzall so that cross member falls completely off. All right, everybody. So all you need now is your trusty envisioning tool. I love using cardboard because it's cheap and it's everywhere and it's available, right? But on this side, you can see that I have some lines marked, okay? Maybe you can, I don't know. The Sharpie doesn't show up that great on camera. But I basically put my shackle in here, okay? Swung it back, took a radius, understood how far the eye of the spring came into the shackle, and then basically went up here and made a template. This will allow if I cut all of what's the cardboard is covering off the frame, this will allow our shackle to swing back, the eye of the spring to miss the frame, and then up here we have a nice 2-inch long or so flat spot, which we're gonna do something with a recovery point coming off the new cross member that we install, right? I'll show you guys that later. But basically the back of the Jeep now is gonna be cut with a Sawzall, 2 inches down straight, and then again on a diagonal. I can always remove more material if I need to, if for some reason my calculation was wrong, but it shouldn't be, right? That old adage of measure twice, cut once, that definitely applies. Now, steel is pretty easy to put back on with a welder, or you can always cut more off. It's not that big of a deal. But I like where this is cut because it gives me enough room here for a weld, which is nice. I can then weld in the bottom here, no big deal. And I miss where the body mount attaches to the frame on the other side when we cut straight down. So I think it's gonna work really well. I think it's gonna work perfect actually and set us up like we've talked about prior with 14 inches of travel. But again, guys, you've seen me do a lot in this video. I've kind of sped through it a little bit. This isn't so much a how-to, just kind of giving you the update on what it takes to mount leaf springs on the rear of a vehicle that was never meant to have them in the position where it's going to place our axle in the wheel well nicely with a little bit of stretch, as well as give us the shackle movement, as well as a rear departure angle. All right, guys, so as we talked about, we kind of sped through it, but at this point, the front is in, right? The perches are welded, everything is painted. The shackles are painted, everything is in, and I'm really super happy with the way it turned out. Now the rear, let me explain something here. We had to move this front bracket, and we were kind of married to the distance that we had to move it forward because we have a skid plate attachment here. And you may or may not know, but on the JKs, the skid plate is responsible for actually holding up your gas tank. So we didn't want to mess with moving that. So we had to move it forward maybe a little bit farther than we would have liked. But in order to maintain that equal ride height front and rear, we did have to move it forward and give us a little bit more of a shackle, or a little less shackle angle in the rear. Now, the shackle angle in the rear of this is about 25 or 30 degrees or so, and we're gonna add some more weight to the rear, put a spare in the back, things like that, which are gonna increase the shackle angle and give it even better off-road performance. On-road, it's gonna work pretty well regardless, because that's about what a factory shackle angle would be for a more streetable, a little bit of a firmer spring. I did a video on leaf springs and how to set them up with shackle angles and what it does to the spring rate and things like that in another video. You can check that out if you're that interested. We're basically on the ground in the rear. I gotta still make a fascia for the rear, cover up all of this. I'm gonna put a piece of tubing that you can see here on this rear cross member that we made, gusset it, put a plate over it, something we can put a D-ring on. But there we go, guys, right? So there it is. We had to relocate our charcoal canister for our emissions because a anti-wrap bar is basically gonna go right on the axle here and run straight up along with our drive shaft. It was all kind of in the way. But guys, at this point, this rig is about ready to hit the trails. We're just up to the details and the finishing of this thing. I gotta bleed brakes, I gotta hook up wheel speed sensors, run emergency brake cables, all that kind of stuff. Stay tuned. We are definitely going to take this rig out on the trails. We're going to compare it to my JKU, which happens to be the same color on 3-link long arms. And we're going to put it on the same obstacles and see what kind of angles it can take and how it flexes out compared to my Jeep with a more standard long arm kit, right? But still the same axles. It's got that 14 bolt. It's got that Super Duty Dana 60. Guys, this was a ton of work. And we will do a cost comparison coming up soon as well to show you dollar for dollar exactly what was spent and what it cost us versus what it would have cost us if we went with the more traditional, 3-link long arm, as I mentioned a minute ago. All right. But anyway, guys, I really appreciate the support. If you like what we're doing here, we got a lot more builds coming. I got a YJ. We're going to start doing giveaway builds and all that kind of stuff. Click that subscribe button, like this video, share it with your buddies. And, that's it. Get out there, build something.